Hey all, I'm here with Fernando Raul from fernandoroulastrology.com, and we are here to initiate or start our new series, which is the implementation of the Hellenistic concept of sect in Vedic astrology. So thank you so much, Fernando, for joining me, and I'm sure this series is going to be unique and it's going to be fun.
Thank you, Aswin, for having me. Yes, we wanted to do this video a while back ago, and we're finally doing it. And this is going to be a very exciting series because I think this is something that few people have tried before, and with good reason, because when I started doing this little comparison we're going to be talking about, it was a little mind-boggling at first, but then, I kind of started figuring out little by little. And I hope this becomes a little nugget of knowledge for everyone out there. So yes, as I was saying, this series represents, our little attempt to bridge together both the Hellenistic school of astrology with the Vedic school of astrology. And this little presentation, I call it Sect and Yoga Karaka. It is an attempt to merge Vedic astrology techniques with Hellenistic astrology techniques. And, I want to say that I had this idea at first, and then you gave me one of your papers you're preparing to a conference in India. And that was like the spark that, gave me the inspiration to do this work. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for the feedback. But yeah, we have been working on it individually, but still, I think it kickstarted the fire to actually start the series on YouTube. So I think that is even more encouraging and fascinating to explore even more. So I think you would want to put a disclaimer right now.
Oh yes, my disclaimer is that this is highly theoretical. This is hypothetical. This is, as I said, this is my little attempt to bridge together Vedic astrology techniques with Hellenistic astrology techniques, specifically what is sect in Hellenistic astrology and the concept of Yoga Karaka in Vedic astrology. And, I want to go step by step to dissect this before we go into the nitty-gritty and the examples that are going to be subsequent videos. This is merely an introductory video. So first of all, I want to define first what is Vedic astrology and what is Hellenistic astrology. Vedic astrology is basically, as you and I know, and probably most of our viewers know, is basically the school of astrology that is practiced in India or in the Indian subcontinent, right? And Vedic astrology is intrinsically related to Vedic school, to Vedanta, to the Vedas, right? And it forms one of the 6 Vedangas or limbs of the Vedas. And it is very important in Vedic times for the electional astrology of doing rites and ceremonies and all that. And Vedic astrology is very popular in India. It's been very popular internationally in the last 50 years, more or less. And it's a very strong school of astrology. On the other hand, Hellenistic astrology is the type of astrology that was practiced in the ancient Greco-Roman world, right? Hellenistic astrology is a polyvalent term because it's sometimes called traditional classical astrology. It can also be called Western classical astrology. But in a way, Hellenistic astrology is the astrology that was practiced in the Mediterranean world between the 2nd century BC and more or less the 7th or 8th century AD, right? And Hellenistic, where does that word come from? It comes from the word Hellas, which means Greece, exactly, which means Greece in the Greek language. So, by that, we start knowing where it comes from. And in a way, Hellenistic and Vedic astrology, some people say that are 2 different schools of astrology, but, I and other people believe that more or less they cross-pollinated between each other. They add a little bit to each other. Each school contributes a little bit to each other. And it is my opinion that Vedic astrology sometimes can fill in the blanks of Hellenistic astrology and vice versa. Hellenistic astrology can also fill in the blanks in Vedic astrology. So in a way, from the get-go, we define that both these schools are somewhat different, right? But first of all, let's state the main differences between both traditions. Well, one of the biggest differences is that Vedic astrology has been practiced uninterruptedly for centuries, while the other has not. As I said before, Vedic astrology is related to Vedanta, to Vedic studies, and it is an integral part both of the culture and the religions of India, right? While Hellenistic astrology, not necessarily. Hellenistic astrology was astrology that was practiced a long time ago, and because of the rise of Christianity in Europe, and we have to remember, Europe, Asia, the Mediterranean, India are modern concepts, or more or less concepts that were developed after these schools of astrology were formed. So, when we say Mediterranean Europe, we're just using semantics here to define a specific place in history, but that not necessarily relates to the modern concept of Europe, of India, of Asia, of Mediterranean, etc. And Hellenistic astrology, in a way, was in the past related to several schools of thought, philosophy, and spirituality, like Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, Stoicism, and those schools eventually just disappeared from Europe because of the rise of Christianity. Some of those intellectuals after the rise of Christianity went to Asia and became part of the Islamic world later on. But in a way, Christianity interrupted the development of astrology in Europe. And in a way, Hellenistic astrology is more or less had the same role, more or less, than Vedic astrology does in India, right? The thing is that instead of temples to the Indian gods, they had temples to the European gods, which were, of course, Jupiter, Saturn, which are the Roman versions. The Greek versions would be Zeus, Kronos, and so on and so forth, right? So the thing with Hellenistic astrology is that it is an interrupted tradition in many ways because of Christianity, as I said before. And this is one of the main reasons why this tradition was not rediscovered until 25, 30 years ago, more or less, right? We are starting to rediscover a lot from this pagan past of Europe, specifically of the Mediterranean. Another big difference between Vedic astrology and Hellenistic astrology is that one is strictly related to a larger body of religious and philosophical precepts, while the other is not. And I've just mentioned that. One is related to the Vedas, to Vedanta, to the Vedic religion, and the other is not related to any spiritual practice per se because it was lost to history. So, there are other differences which we're not going to get into specifically technique-wise. The idea that traditional Vedic astrology is practiced with a sidereal zodiac, and Hellenistic astrology is practiced with a tropical zodiac. However, more and more people of Vedic thought are starting to use a tropical zodiac for reasons that we're not going to get into. But that's another big difference between both techniques, right? Between both schools of astrology. But, the thing is, and this is something I believe in, it's that both schools of astrology have a lot more in common than they have in difference. And this is something that I'm trying to convey through this little work of mine. A big common point between the two schools is that, both Vedic astrology and Hellenistic astrology use the same rashis. They use more or less the same planetary significations. And once again, they use more or less the same zodiac, as we touched upon just now. And the other big common point between the two schools is that they both form part of the same Indo-European tradition. We have to remember that the European languages stem from the same Sanskrit language that in the distant past was like the root of all the languages in the Indo-European family of languages. And we share a lot of symbology together, specifically the solar symbology. And at the same time, we've experienced both the Indian world and the Mediterranean world centuries of cultural exchange, which also helps to fortify the hypothesis that Jyotish was strongly influenced by Hellenistic astrology, and at the same time helped the techniques of ancient astrology survive until the current era, because it was uninterrupted, like unlike the tradition in Europe that was strongly interrupted by Christianity. So, this little work of mine is, as I've just said before, it's the idea to fortify this idea that it's the same tradition, that it's more or less the same concepts, and that although from the get-go, these techniques that have just been rediscovered in the past 25 years can be related, can be associated, can be bridged to techniques in India that are much, much older, that have been with us much, much longer time, but that in essence, hypothetically, they could have come from Hellenistic astrology, and through the centuries, became part of the Indian mythos, right? The Indian ethos. And in a way, they kind of, are just distant cousins that are coming back together. So all these points bring me to the main idea that certain things between Hellenistic astrology and Vedic astrology can mesh. So, and this is the basic precept of this presentation, that we can use techniques from Hellenistic astrology in a Vedic context and vice versa. But the thing is that we have to see what works and what doesn't work, at least at first, theoretically, hypothetically, which is what this little presentation is all about. Okay? Because you're going to see when you read Hellenist, and you've read them too, Aswin, when you start reading Hellenistic astrology, things on Hellenistic astrology from classical writers or modern writers, classical writers like Vitius Valens, Dorotheus, you can even put there Ptolemy, you start to see, wow, this is like Vedic astrology, and correct me if I'm wrong, you start reading it and you see, and you say, this is obvious, we know this already from Vedic astrology. And unfortunately, most Westerners that are into Hellenistic astrology are not that read on Vedic astrology for several reasons that we're not going to get into. But us, that we have a Vedic astrology basis, realize, oh my God, this is a lot like Vedic astrology. And at the end of this work, I'm gonna point out several things. Let me just point them out just right now. For example, the timing techniques in Hellenistic astrology that now most writers are just, wow, this is incredible. But in Vedic astrology, we have dashas for a long while, and we understand that, right? The idea of for example, Papakatari, that we already know about that, hemming, in Hellenistic astrology, hemming is there, and it's like, wow, but we already know that. And when you read these techniques, it's like, wow, you can't help yourself think that these were more or less the same schools, because it's very ignorant to think that the ancient world was any different from our modern world, except obviously from the technological advancements that, in a way are just tools to make us dumber in many ways. But, there was an exchange between the Mediterranean and further beyond the Indus River, which is the root of the name Hindustan or India, in a way. Coins from that era were found in different places of Asia and from the Mediterranean. So, there are evidence of exchanges before the time of Alexander the Great between India and Europe. And not only that, Hellenistic astrology is just a copy-paste from Egyptian astrology and Babylonian astrology. And God knows where those came from. They could have come from India. I strongly think of a prehistoric mythical past of astrology that has to do with Atlantis, but you can never prove that, right? But in a way, there's no such thing as a genuine astrology. Okay, more or less everything is copy-paste. However, there are certain things that are intrinsically native to certain schools of astrology. For example, nakshatras in India are very native to India, right? The idea maybe in Hellenistic astrology of sect, maybe it's very native to the Mediterranean. So there are certain things that are very, very native, but that in a way are just like little nuggets that help build this big pyramid of astrology. Because as I've said before, I believe that there's only one astrology because there's only one Mars, one Sun, one Moon, etc., etc. So now with the internet, all these traditions are coming together. And in a way, the work you're doing, the work I'm doing, the work other people are doing, we're just, rebuilding that pyramid of a global traditional astrology. So we can mesh these techniques, and that's what we're going to do today in this series. What we're going to do is that we're going to try to start to combine the principle of Yoga Karakas, which we're going to explain right now, with the principle of Sect, which we're also going to explain. So now we've seen the common and the different points between Hellenistic and Vedic. Now we're going to describe what Yoga Karakas are and what the Sect is. Okay. Do you have any questions until now, Aswin, or are you okay?
No, I'm completely okay. I was just trying to add 1 or 2 points to what you said.
Oh, definitely. Go ahead.
That from historical perspective, Hellenistic astrology is an interrupted tradition, while Vedic astrology is an uninterrupted and continuous tradition. So the actual problem for Hellenistic astrology is the rise of Christianity, and Christianity immediately started seeing astrology as a
competition.
Maybe competition, but they call it as foul play or something like that, which is against the principle of the religion. But even after the advent of Christianity by 4th or 5th century CE, the astrological tradition kind of continued to 7th or 8th century, and the Islamic by the end of the fall of Roman Empire, or at the fall of Roman Empire, Persian rulers of the late 7th or early 8th century they kind of absorbed the Hellenistic astrological tradition, and they kind of translated it into Arabic, like astrologers like Masha Allah and Umar al-Tubari and all those people, which is why we still have the works of Dorotheus of Sidon and Rotarius of Egypt and so on. So it kind of carried on until the 10th or 11th century CE due to the absorption by Islamic astrologers. But still, once Islam treated astrology as a demon or a mitigating force, that probably it marked the beginning of the end of a wonderful astrological tradition, which kind of declined, and it should not have been forgotten or lost, but still it was. And fortunately, due to some of the scholars and selfless astrologers and researchers, we still have managed to revive some of the astrological texts from the Hellenistic tradition. And with that, millennials of our era is trying to bridge it. And I and Fernando, you are trying to do it as
and at the same time, those Muslim transcriptions of the Hellenistic writings were the ones that were later reintroduced into Europe after the medieval ages and the beginning of the Renaissance.
Exactly.
So in a way, we are seeing just, like a relay, take the stick, now you take the stick, and now we take this stick with the internet. And, another go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying this is another proof to say that everything is cross-pollinated, and astrology just didn't jump from the sky to the earth. So everything needs transfer and transmission, and I'm sure we still don't have materials to prove that this was transmitted from here to here, but still, from hindsight, I think that is the basic underlying truth, which is still yet to be uncovered, but still it is truth we know we are just unable to prove.
No, definitely. And, another thing that you were talking about, the idea of why Hellenistic astrology disappeared from Europe. Two things specifically is that the rise of Christianity basically destroyed or more or less took down the whole spiritual apparatus from which Hellenistic astrology depended on. Those are the ruins in Greece and in Rome. And another more important epistemological principle is that many astrologers thought that astrology was absolute, right? And Christianity brought the idea that life is not absolute. That the idea of that you build your own life and you can save yourself in the afterlife, and that was incredibly attractive to most people instead of the absolutist fate that these Greco-Roman principles postulated, which in a way gives us a little hint to modern practice that like the Roman, like the Latin saying goes, stars incline, but they don't oblige, or they don't determine in many ways. So we have to be very aware of this, that although astrology can strongly determine one's life, it doesn't predetermines it. You know what I mean? Free will is an intrinsic part of life, and astrology is just basically a map of the most common denominators that might express themselves in your life. So, in a way, Hellenistic astrology just disappeared. And it's not until very recently, man, like 25 years, we're talking about late 80s, early 90s, when we start seeing people rediscover this. Although it started more or less at the beginning of the 20th century when they started translating, all these old Greco-Roman texts in European libraries into modern languages that started this idea of let's go back to Hellenistic astrology. Of course, in the beginning, most academics thought this was just hocus pocus because it was astrology, but at the same time, it served as a historiographical reference to see how life was back then in the Greco-Roman world. And years later, astrologers who became more serious in their academic formation in Latin and Greek and classical studies started translating this text and started rediscovering a traditional astrology, right? And now I think the next step in all of this process is to bridge it to Vedic astrology. Because us, like you, Aswin, that you come from a Jyotishi family, I that started with Vedic astrology, we start reading this text and we see, wow, this is very similar to what I read from Varahamihira, from Jaimini, from Parasha. It's not the same, but what I mean is the same type of writings, and in a way, when you read Hellenistic principles, you say, this is like very simple stuff, but then you see some techniques that are like, wow, what the heck is this?
Yes, you tend to feel it, especially when you reach the more complex systems like triplicity lords and stuff, because even I can completely attest to the fact, because I'm simultaneously reading 3 books on Hellenistic astrology, so I can understand how delicate and complex it can get. It is as complex as Jyotish if you get into the analysis or interpretation of divisional charts. So go on.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, and it's something that's just starting. I mean, we're just starting with this. I mean, maybe in 50 years it's going to be a whole different story, but the internet is bringing all these ideas together. And as I talked with you before, I mean, this is the beginning of a true global traditional astrology, and we're just pioneering in this. So let's continue. First of all, what we're going to do today is that we're going to be meshing together the Vedic principle of Yoga Karaka with the Hellenistic principle of Sect. So first of all, we have to define what are Yoga Karakas and what is Sect. So first of all, what are Yoga Karakas? Let's analyze the word. What does yoga mean? Yoga means union in Sanskrit, to yoke, to come together. Like the yellow part of the egg comes together with the clear part. It's just a union, okay? And Karka means significator, or that signifies. So Yoga Karka means the significator of union. And what does that mean? For all the people who are Hellenistic astrologers who are watching, what does that mean? I mean, yogas are an intrinsic part of Vedic astrology. unions. These unions can be done by conjunction, by aspect, by D9 position, etc., etc., etc. This is something that is not present in Hellenistic astrology, although it is present, but it is not strictly referred to as yogas or unions. They do give combinations for certain results, but they do not categorize them as unions or whatever the Greek name for it might be. But yogas are an intrinsic part of Vedic astrology, and Vedic astrology for a long, long, long time was mainly practiced by crude memorization of thousands of yogas, right?
Yeah.
Just the same way you would memorize the Mahabharata or the Rig Veda or whatever. You memorize these yogas, and that's how you would practice astrology. So yogas are a very important part of Vedic astrology because through yogas, be it by conjunction, by aspect, by position, by D9 position, by a lot of things that are, you know, very complicated to memorize,
Yes.
which are not systematic in many ways. Some are not. You memorize certain positions that create certain results. But for Yoga Karaka is different because it is a significator of yoga. Union conjunction is not necessary. Merely the Yoga Karaka is necessary for a result, an important result. So Yoga Karakas are mainly used when we analyze Raj yogas. Yogas are union. Raj means king in Sanskrit, so are unions of being king. And Raj yogas are done by the combination of certain houses in a chart. And now we're going to get a little bit technical, but we're going to do it really fast because I don't want to spend a lot of time in this. So I'm going to explain it, and then if people want to know more, just look it up, Yoga Karakas, look the different houses in Vedic astrology, and so on and so forth. Basically, when you analyze Raj yogas, there are 4 types of houses: Kendras, Trikonas, impressionable houses, and Trishadaya houses. Okay? First of all, Trikonas are very important. Those are houses of inspiration in many ways. Those are houses of Dharma in many ways, which is the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. Okay? Then we have Kendras, which would be the pivots, right? The squares, which would be 1, 4, 7, and 10. But mainly 4, 7, and 10. Why? Because the 1 is both a Kendra and a Trikona. What are Kendras? Kendras, which is a Greek word, which basically is like a square. Kendras are houses of action, okay? So we have houses of inspiration with houses of action, which would be 1, 5, 9, houses of inspiration, 1, 4, 7, and 10 houses of action, right? The action you do with your emotions, with your house, with your upbringing, the 4th. The action you do with people, with associates, with romantic interest, the 7th. The action you do to distinguish yourself with among others, to work hard, that would be the 10th, right? And the action you do for your body would be the 1, which is also inspiration. Then we have the 3rd type of house, which would be the Trishadaya house. 3 is number 3, Shad is 6, and Daya, I believe it was like goals or aspirations. But basically the Trishadaya houses are the 3, the 6th, and the 11th. And these are yoga breaker houses. These are the houses that break the inspiration and the action from the Kendras and the Trikonas, okay? This is very simple.
Yeah.
I mean, you understand this, some people don't, but I'm just doing it very fast.
Sure.
These are the houses that break the inspiration and the action coming together. The 3 would be our ideas, our hobbies, you know, our brothers, our neighbors, you know, short distance travel. The 6 are debts, obstacles, sickness, and the 11th is our idea of what we want in life, our goals and aspirations that sometimes not necessarily have to do with inspiration and action, but what others tell us is the correct thing to do. Those are the enemies of the yogas that are caused by Kendras and Trikonas. And finally, we have the impressionable houses, which would be the 2nd, the 12th, and the 8th, which are going to be like chameleonic houses. They are going to take the form of the house lord they're conjunct or related to, right? The 2nd and the 12th are very impressionable. The 8th is a very tricky house. It is an impressionable house, but it is a difficult house. So if it's associated with a Trishadaya lord, it's going to be a very strong interruption. But if it's associated with a Kendra or a Trikona, it's going to be very polyvalent. You know, it's going to be like going to the casino, in my experience.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not gonna be bad, it's going to be good. It's going to be like related. So those are the 4 types of houses. Where do Yoga Karakas come in? Yoga Karakas are basically the planets or planet that can create Raj Yogas, which would basically be the conjunction of a Kendra, 1, 4, 7, 10, with the conjunction of a Trikona, 1, 5, 9. However, this can also be done by mutual aspects. This can be done also by Parivartana or mutual reception. This can also be done by Trikona or Kendra Sambandha, which is something I use. You know, if they're more or less in the same degrees, which is a Hellenistic aspect. Anyways, you can have that also by trine or square. Okay, I know I hope people are understanding this. This is basic Vedic astrology. If you do not know this, you should go and read up on this. However, some lagnas you need 2 planets, maybe the 9th lord and the 10th lord, maybe the 5th lord and the 4th lord, maybe the 7th lord and the 9th lord, and so on and so forth. You need 2 types of planet to conjoin, to relate to each other, to have Sambandha relationships to create a Raj Yoga. And during the dasha of those 2 periods, dasha, antardasha, vice versa, you know, dasha sun, antardasha Mars, or dasha Mars, antardasha sun, you're going to get that great result where you're going to become a king, you're going to become a leader, you're going to become a banker and a famous actor, a famous athlete, and so on and so forth. But if that conjunction is related to Trishadaya, 3rd, 6th, 11th, that's not going to happen. And if that conjunction does not happen in square or trine, that's not going to happen either. Maybe it happens, but it's going to be weak. And if Lagna Lord is not strong, greatness might be achieved, but hindrances will be there present. But what happens in some Lagnas, one planet rules both a Trikona house, 1, 5, 9, and a square Kendra, 1, 4, 7, or 10. And those are called Yoga Karakas. At last, we're here. These are planets that by themselves can create Raj Yoga by position. Okay? Why? Because they rule both a Trikona and a Kendra. Okay? So, for them to form Raj Yoga, they have to be either in square or in Trikona. They're not going to form Raj Yoga in the 2nd, the 3rd, the 6th, the 8th, the 11th, and the 12th. They do. If they're there, maybe something might happen, but it's not going to be a Raj Yoga. It's going to be a yoga of little greatness, right? And if the Lagna Lord is not well disposed, there might be greatness, but there might be other hindrances going on to the person. This will be the type of person that can achieve great things, but internally something's wrong. There's a dilemma going on. You know, this is something that's very interesting. It's like, you know, I achieve greatness, I'm famous, I have money, I have power, but intrinsically there's a hindrance going on, right? That's what happens when the Lagna Lord is not well disposed. Okay, so these are Yoga Karakas, planets that can form Raj Yoga by themselves. And this only happens in 6 Lagnas: Taurus, Cancer, Leo, Libra, Capricorn, and Aquarius. It only happens to Lagnas of Venus, the luminaries, and Saturn. For the Lagnas of Venus is Saturn, for the Lagnas of the luminaries is Mars, and for the Lagnas of Saturn are Venus. Hence the saying that Venus and Saturn are best friends. Okay? Yeah. This is why they're best friends, because they're Yoga Karaka to each other. So that's basically a Yoga Karaka. Yoga Karakas can only be Mars, Saturn, and Venus. So in this series, we're going to be analyzing those 3 specific planets in relation to these 6 specific Lagnas. So that's a Yoga Karaka planet. Do you want to add anything, Aswin, or are we clear with this?
I think we are clear with this. So we'll just give a short introduction to what is Sect as well, because So yes. I think that will finish off the entire introduction session to a fulfillment, and then we can directly jump on to the ascendants you mentioned from the next video.
Actually, after it, I'm going to be discussing something else about Sect.
Okay, sure.
But now I want to discuss, okay, we already know what Yoga Karakas are. So now we're going to be discussing what sect is. And sect is from a Hellenistic astrology background, okay? So sect in many ways comes from the Greek word hairesis, okay, which basically means school. This is the idea that planets are divided in schools, okay? There's a day school and there's a night school. There is a day sect and a night sect. And basically what sect does, it divides the planet in two specific groups to analyze them, okay? And this is a concept that's very alien to Vedic astrology because we do not see this in any classic specified this way, okay? And sect is used mainly to quantify the maleficence or the beneficence of natural benefics and natural malefics in a chart. How malefic are going to be natural malefics in this chart, and how benefic are going to be natural benefics in this chart. And that's going to depend on day sect or night sect, which is determined by the time of your birth. Is it a day chart or is it a night chart? And this is a very intrinsic Hellenistic principle. This is basic. This is just as basic as the Yoga Karaka principles I just discussed for Vedic astrology. So in a way, you have two schools. One is a night sect and one is a day sect. The day sect and the night sect are reigned by lords. The day sect lord is the moon, and I'm sorry, the day sect lord is the sun, I'm sorry, and the night sect lord is the moon. So in a way, the luminaries are more or less neutral, right? And in the day sect, you have Jupiter and Saturn, and in the night sect, you have Venus and Mars. Why is this? Really, nobody knows, but this is the sect. Some people might explain why these groups are formed this way, but you know, this is how it is. It is like the rules of natural friendship in Vedic astrology. This is just how it is. So you have the day sect, which would be Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. Night sect, you have Moon, Venus, and Mars. And as you can see, you have one luminary, one natural benefic, and one natural malefic. And these sects are the way we determine how maleficent natural malefics are going to be and how beneficent natural benefics are going to be. In a day chart, the strongest natural benefic is Jupiter, and the more constructive natural malefic is Saturn. The less natural malefic is Venus, and the more destructive natural malefic is Mars. Why? Because it is a day birth. So in a day birth, Jupiter and Saturn get better dignity, while Venus and Mars get worse dignity. On the other hand, in a night sect chart or a night birth, Venus will be the best natural benefic, Mars will be the more constructive natural malefic, Jupiter is going to be a weaker natural benefic, and Saturn is going to be a more destructive natural malefic. But this depends whether it is a day chart or a night chart. And this technique, believe it or not, has been rediscovered in the last 25 years. A lot of Western astrologers have no idea what I'm talking about. Specifically, young YouTube astrologers probably don't know what this is. Okay? This is how we qualify natural benefics and natural malefics in a Hellenistic chart. Okay? So for example, we are born during the day, and Mars is going to be the most difficult malefic planet. Point. Doesn't matter what house it rules. No, it's going to be the most malefic planet. Okay, and Venus is going to be the best planet. I'm sorry, Jupiter is going to be the.
You
Jupiter
mean in a day chart? Yeah,
in a day chart. Yeah,
yes.
I'm sorry. In a day chart, Jupiter is going to be the best benefic planet, while Saturn is going to be the more constructive natural malefic, and Venus is just going to be inert. While in a night chart, Saturn is going to be the worst planet. Venus is going to be the best planet, while Mars is going to be the more constructive natural malefic, and Jupiter is going to be inert. And this is how you figure out how these planets work from a Hellenistic point of view. So we've described we've described Yoga Karaka, and we described Sect, right? Sect is more complicated. Don't get me wrong. There are other rejoicing factors that we're not touching about. We're not touching the idea of the moon when it's new moon and it's a night chart that some people say then things change. We're not, and we're not going to be talking about other rejoicing factors. We're not going to be, and that's something I'm going to be discussing farther on. So we're now approaching more or less the end of this first part, but we've described what Hellenistic astrology is, what Vedic astrology is, what Yoga Karakas are, and what Sect is. But, you know, if we start from the idea that it is the same Indo-European tradition, there was cross-pollination between both schools of astrology, then why don't we have Sect in Vedic astrology? Well, we probably already have Sect, but we don't realize that. And this is something I want to discuss before we start with the other videos, is, you know, is Sect already in Jyotish? And this is something that's very probably true. Like, for example, what does Sect describe in a chart? The strength of a planet, correct, Aswin?
Yeah.
How do we call strength in Sanskrit?
Shadbala.
Bala. But also, yeah, Shad, six powers.
Yeah, there are 6 things, but basically we take to analyze the strength of a planet in a particular place with Shadbala. So exactly. There are other balas as well, like Digbala and stuff. So
yeah. And what is like day and night? It is time. And how do you say time in Sanskrit?
Hora.
Oh, Kala. Almost.
Hora. No, when you talk about Sect, so I think I almost suspect that there is a lot of text that has been lost that Parashara has already written, is the D2 chart, the analysis of D2 chart, where we take the sun's hora and moon's hora. So I think there is something that was missed in transmission, and it probably had a link to the concept of Sect, maybe, but we are not sure. So,
I think it is more in Kalevala, which is part of the strength. And we have references to it. First of all, in Yavana Jataka, which is probably the oldest Jyotish text in India, contrary to what some people might want to think, you know, in Yavana Jataka, in chapter 1, shloka 83, you have a reference to Sect, strictly defined as the same as it is defined in Hellenistic astrology.
Yeah, but Yavana Jataka, I think we are not still sure about what Yavana Jataka is actually, if it is a entire Greek. I think it is a cross-pollination of both.
Oh, definitely.
So
definitely.
The Sect concept was probably not lifted, but still borrowed from the Hellenistic tradition, and it was implemented in along with the existing Vedic tradition that people were following.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, that's what I'm trying to say, Aswin.
Sure,
the thing is that we have a reference to Sect the same way as in Hellenistic astrology in Yavana Jataka, but later on it changes a little bit, because in Parashara you also have a reference to Sect in chapter 3, shlokas 35-38, but this time it changes. Night Sect is composed of Saturn, Mars, and Moon, and day Sect is composed of Jupiter, Venus, and Sun. So Venus and Saturn change Sect.
Yes.
And you also get this in Brihad Jataka in chapter 2, shloka 21, where you also change that. And in a way, when I first read this, I realized, well, that's really weird. They changed Sect. But then I realized, wait a minute, that's the same category they use for Kalevala. And, you know, what I think is that Kalevala, which is composed of different strengths of time of day birth, night birth, time of Shukla Paksha or Krishna Paksha, the month, the Ritu, right, the year, and so on and so forth. These are strength-based in time. So what I think is that Sect was absorbed into Kalevala. And in a way, they changed the Sect for this arrangement. This is just an idea, a theory, because in Yavana Jataka, which is probably older than than Parashara and definitely older than Brihad Jataka, you see the same sect as Hellenistic astrology, right? Which was probably written in the 2nd century AD, and it was transcribed later on, right? Some people are saying now that's the 4th, 6th century AD. But in a way, you get that, but later on, it changes into this different sect. So in a way, maybe Vedic astrology already has a sect through Kalevala. And if you hear what famous astrologers have to say about Kalevala, specifically Ernst Wilhelm, he says that Kalevala is a very tricky thing because the calculations don't mesh. They don't quite combine. And right now, the way we do Shatbala is mainly thanks to the writings of Bibi Raman. He basically is the father of modern Shatbala as we know it today. And there are different opinions on how you calculate Kalevala. And so, you know, difference to other balas, you know, there are some controversies for this. So, you know, these are different things that I'm mentioning, but in a way, maybe Sect already is in Vedic astrology through Kalevala, or as you said, through the Horus chart. So, and Kalevala is also, the specific thing about Sect is in Nathonatak Vala or Divarati Vala. Okay, that's one of the parts that we use for Kalevala, because Kalevala is like 5 different calculations that you have to do, and the one related to the time of birth is called Divarati Vala. Okay, so as a hypothesis, we can already postulate that that Sect already is in Vedic astrology through Kalevala. Okay, so we've discussed everything
in length.
In length. So before we end, what is the purpose of this series? You know, the purpose of this series is to see, can Sect add another quality factor to Yoga Karakas, to specific lagnas with Yoga Karakas, okay? And the initial answer is yes, because Sect is just another type of dignity, if you really think about it, in terms of the Vedic perspective, not the Hellenistic perspective. Some people might say yes, some people might say no, but it is the idea. Can we qualify that Yoga Karaka? Definitely. Why? Because the Yoga Karakas are going to be 3: Venus, Saturn, and Mars. Mars and Venus are going to do obviously very well during night births and not so well in day births. While Saturn is going to do very well in day births and not that well in night births. But all 3, in all 6 scenarios, in all 6 lagnas, 6 scenarios because there are 2 different, in all 12 scenarios, because you have day and night for the 6 lagnas, are going to give Raj Yoga if they have the requisites I mentioned, that they have to be in square or trikona. But if it's a night birth, it's going to be difficult. And if it's going to be a day birth, it's going to be hard for they have to be in Trikona or Kendra, and if it's a day sect planet like Saturn, it's going to do good in day and bad at night. And if it's a night sect planet, it's going to do good at night and bad at day, in theory. But you know, that's the principle. We can say with certainty that this is going to be how it's going to be. But it's more difficult than that, because we got to go lagna per lagna to see how these Raj Yogas will work through these Yoga Karakas combined with Sect, right? Venus is going to be, Venus and the luminaries lagnas are going to have malefics of Yoga Karakas as Mars and Saturns. So these Raj Yogas are going to be either more constructive or less constructive, right? For day births, Saturn will create more constructive Raj Yogas, and for night births, he's going to create less constructive Raj Yogas. And for the luminaries, Mars during a night birth is going to do more constructive Raj Yogas, and during the day, he's going to create less constructive Raj Yogas. And for Saturn lagnas, Venus is going to create more effective Raj Yogas during the night and less effective Raj Yogas during the day. So these are the questions we're gonna answer. How will Yoga Karakas behave according to Sect with 6 specific lagnas, where Yoga Karakas are present in relation to Sect? Okay? And before we start, we gotta do, once again, the disclaimer that this is highly theoretical, highly hypothetical, and at the same time, we are discarding a lot of things. For example, we are not taking into consideration Mercury, okay, because Mercury is neutral. There's a lot of debate whether Mercury is a day sect planet or a night sect planet. And at the same time, in Vedic astrology, Mercury can be a natural benefic or a natural malefic, natural benefic or natural benefic or natural, depending on conjunction. And there's also a third state of Mercury that people seldom talk about. That is when he is alone in a chart. That for me is a big mystery that some people just seldom discuss. Yeah. I mean, Mercury alone in a chart is very, very interesting fact that most people don't talk about. So with Mercury, you have a lot of polyvalence, which is natural to Mercury. So we're gonna forget about Mercury for this discussion in the following videos. We're not gonna be discussing dignity per se in terms of where a planet is, if it's in Usha, if it's Nicha, if it's Muratikona, Swakshetra, great friend, great enemy. We're not going to be discussing that because that's very specific. We're not going to be discussing additional rejoicing factors and Sect, as we mentioned before, whether he is above the horizon or below the horizon in a day sign or a night sign, because there's also a lot of polyvalence in respect to how we categorize day signs and night signs. Also, we're not going to be discussing combustion, and we're only going to be touching upon lagnas with Yoga Karakas, with Sol Yoga Karakas as one planet. Because if we discuss the other 6 lagnas, you know, it's going to be very complicated. And that's what I stumbled upon, and that's why I decided only upon lagnas with Sol Yoga Karakas. So we're going to be doing first the Venus lagnas, then the luminaries lagnas, Cancer and Leo, and finally Saturn's lagnas. And then we're going to have a conclusion video. So that's what I have to say for this introductory video, Aswin.
Great. So I think this is a very good establishment for our series, and we kind of touched upon so many things that were probably necessary and which might add as a very valuable factor to the viewers in order to understand the future videos based upon what we are doing. So and we also spoke a lot about the revival of Hellenistic stuff. So I think it is like paying a good respect to remember one of the greats, Robert Schmidt, who had recently passed away, and it's a salute from every one of us who are our colleagues and friends on behalf of myself and Fernando Raul. So, and we'll see you in the next videos that we'll do for the Lagnas. So thank you so much.
Thank you.